Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel. Listen, this is going to be a COVID vaccine subject discussion. And frankly, had I known what I'm about to share with you, I probably would have waited quite a while before getting the COVID vaccine that I got. And the reasons are both ethical and moral. Consider in the U.S., a third of our population, a third of the U.S. population has been infected by and recovered from the COVID-19 virus. And there's increasing evidence, like overwhelming today meaning to mid-September 2021, that natural immunity, which is real, is at a minimum just as protective as a vaccination. Every other country, every other advanced country in the world considers previous infection from the virus as natural immunity and includes that in their strategy for how vaccines are distributed, who gets them, and so forth. The U.S. is the only country that says, screw all that, we're just going to vaccinate everybody, and then they've now come out with mandatory vaccinations for all of these people, regardless of whether you've had the virus or not. And that is just wrong, because that creates two levels of citizens. I mean, think about it. If the purpose of the vaccine is to save lives, why waste a vaccination on someone who has already survived? That's not a life that you need to make equal to the person who has comorbidities, immunosuppressive issues, and that. Or at higher risk, age, so forth. What about those countries that have only 1% of their population vaccinated? Why not send those vaccines there? So what's the reason? Well, the primary reason has come down to politics. It is a political issue. It is not a health issue, where people who have already recovered from COVID-19, regardless of the severity, are being treated as if they are still infected and they still a danger. Not only do people who have survived not have to worry about getting sick again soon anyway, and I'll get into that, they do not infect others. This thing where they could still be carrying a viral load and they could still infect somebody else, that is just not true, because your immune system has already taken care of that, right? Any virus that gets into you, now that you have natural immunity, your immune system is going to take care of that. I'll explain that in more detail, and it's not just about antibodies. We need to stop talking about antibodies and start talking about T memory cells and B cells. I'll explain that in a minute. Natural immunity is being ignored for political reasons. And this is primarily from this administration. It is now being used as a wedge issue. And those who have obtained natural immunity and don't want to take the vaccine are assumed to be racist, white supremacists, knuckle draggers, and so forth. And their goal is to kill Granny. Instead, what should happen is, if you have survived COVID, and 100 million people have, just wait your turn for the vaccine, and you get to decide whether or not you need it or not. Now, I'll talk about why that's important. as I said, the moral issue is if we're using the vaccine to save lives, don't vaccinate people who already have immunity. That's dumb. That's a waste of a vaccine, which could be used for someone else. However, in this country, in the US, our CDC and this administration continue to say, forget all that. Natural immunity varies from person to person, which is true, but it's not significant enough to say, because we don't know exactly. I mean, are you going to try to measure 100 million people? No. But because we don't know, there's that one person that might have less immunity than somebody else, and because we don't know what that difference is, we just vaccinate everybody. The issue is not about whether or not that natural immunity is effective. It's that somebody wants to know, somebody wants to count and track every person, right? And that's almost impossible to do if you then try to say, let's take a look at the people who have been infected. How do we know? Well, you can't, because there's no way to get to people who have said, yes, I've been infected, no, I haven't, versus those who say, no, I haven't, right? Or even people that have been asymptomatic. So the folks are saying, forget that. Let's just vaccinate everybody. That means we got everybody. That's dumb. That's just dumb, right? Just show how bad that waste is. Of the people who have already been infected, over 50% have now also gotten vaccinated, including me. Now, would I have done that had I known this? Probably not. I would have waited my turn, right? And then there's this should an exception be made for those who have already had COVID-19? There's an ethics question on why do you treat people who have already been infected and recovered and have natural immunity as equally vulnerable to the virus? It is just not true. Or, better yet, equally threatening to those vulnerable to COVID-19. Politics is the underlying issue. If you have been infected by COVID-19 and survived, which is 98.5% or something like that of the people, you are not a threat and cannot be a threat to someone else. You shouldn't have to mask up. You shouldn't have to social. You shouldn't have to do any of that, because you cannot carry the virus to someone else because your immune system takes care of that. They don't want to talk about that. The CDC, this current administration, they don't want to talk about that, right? There are three things that affect immunity. One of them is real time. Bang, you got hit and your body starts doing its thing. That's called the antibodies, and your body develops antibodies to do the immediate first line attack on the invading virus, right? And that's called, your antibodies just go crazy. And that's why some people say, well, let's measure the antibodies. The fact is, antibodies reduce in amount in your body over time. They have to, because your body can't function at the initial attack level of antibodies. Your blood would become like thick as syrup if that happened. You would die. You can't live in a constant state of high antibodies. That's just not possible for humans. What is the other two areas are memory B cells and memory T cells. B as in Bravo, T as in Tango, right? Those two together form the long-term immunity and give you natural immunity, and they fight the natural infection. They're called memory cells for a reason. The antibodies deal with the initial attack. The memory cells remember what that virus looked like. So if it comes again, those memory cells recreate the antibodies and say, okay, we know what that looks like, right? Now go attack it again. So it's how long the memory cells last? A really long time, by the way. So what happens then is that your natural response, your natural immune response lasts quite a while. But no one wants to talk about memory cell levels in the body. And we shouldn't be talking about antibodies, because most antibodies levels will taper off about 8 months. And that's where this 8-month get your booster shot thing comes in. You don't even need to worry about that. What you need to find out is, what about your memory cells level? Now, here's the other part with the vaccine. Your natural immunity remembers the entire virus, what it looks like. The vaccine only goes for that spike protein, that one area on the virus that it knows about. That's the vaccine. Your memory cells, your memory T and B cells, remember the entire vaccine, the entire virus, including any other variants, because it's looking at the entire thing. So natural immunity then becomes better than getting a vaccine, right? So let's talk about a durable immune response. In the Cleveland Clinic, they surveyed 50,000 employees, and they compared 4 groups based on the history of COVID infection and so forth. There were 1,300 unvaccinated employees who also were previously infected during the study time. Not a single one of those people tested positive again. No one wants to talk about that, and that's from the Cleveland Clinic, right? In Israel, we get a lot of information out of Israel. They don't need to vaccinate previously infected people. I mean, it's such a small number, it doesn't matter. Some countries will say that previous infection matters. Most do. There is an argument in the scientific community, in the medical community, that says there probably is not a lot of difference in terms of immunity to the spike protein versus the whole virus. What's the bottom line? It's the politics of natural immunity. Now, originally, even Fauci said, well, we probably need to consider it, right? And then something started to happen. Back in May of 2020, Rand Paul, he's a Republican senator from Kentucky, started arguing that since he already had the virus, that he shouldn't need to wear a mask. And he's been very vocal against Fauci and the CDC in this mandatory masking up and social distancing and all that for people that have already had the virus. The problem was he was a Republican. And then to make things worse, Trump, who was also a Republican, started talking back in October, said that he recovered from COVID and it made him immune. And Twitter didn't like that. They said it was misleading, which is not true. You are immune. There have been other arguments about that, and the politics ends up being because the um, the Republican conservative folks were saying, nah, let's think about this more. It just happened to be them. There are liberals who feel the same way, but they will get canceled if they start talking about, let's think about this natural immunity thing. And should we consider people with natural immunity, people who've had the virus before, differently, right? And then the organizational fight started. Now it became conservative versus Republican, conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat, and so forth. So if you came out and had any questions at all or any different thoughts about this whole beer virus thing, you were considered anti-government, you were considered right-wing, racist, white supremacist, all the bad words that they want to use to silence you and to try to silence somebody like me, who is neither of those other things, right? So you now have the argument between the U.S. entity, CDC, and the administration, and the rest of the world, right? Instead of talking about vaccinated and unvaccinated, they should be talking about immune and non-immune. The risk analysis needs to be different, but the politics now is getting in the way. And now with the administration or the president coming out with these mandatory vaccinations, which only are in place to protect businesses, because the businesses would not mandate anything unless they had some political cover. So now I can say, hey, we're being told to do it, so to your employees, you get to do it. What's the result? They can't even deliver babies in upstate New York now because, 20%, 30% of the nurses quit. They said, we're not going to do that. Because they listen to the science. You have New York calling out the National Guard to drive school buses, because school bus drivers, who are typically older folks, and said, we're not going to do that anymore, and you're not going to make us. So how many of these, what happens into national defense contractors? What happens if the people that are making our ammo, aircraft, weapons, refueling, what happens to the folks that support the military that are civilians, and they say, we're not going to do it? I mean, it's hard enough to hire people now. And I think that's going to come to a head as well as in the courts. So this was kind of a ramble. My whole point is that this thing is no longer about the science. It is about the politics of COVID, and it's about the ability and the desperateness of the administration in this country and New Zealand and Australia and Canada and a couple other countries on this side of the world to control the behavior of the citizens, to make them do something that is not supported by a consensus of the scientific community and the medical community. Right? It's been screwed up. They didn't focus on the people at risk. They're painting everybody with the same brush. It's morally wrong. It's ethically wrong. And it's not based on science anymore. So I'm going to put the link to this article. It's from BMJ. That's the British Medical Journal. And it is written for people in the healthcare industry. So have that at. There's more information in there, and there's complete footnotes and all that. That if you're geeked up enough, you can go look at it too. But just give it some thought. I mean, we shouldn't be We shouldn't be lemmings or sheeple and be walking down this path and just believing what our current administration and its surrogates, meaning the CDC, are saying, because it's way beyond a medical reason or saving lives, or it's not even about that anymore. It's about making people do something, forcing people to do something that they have said, I don't want to do, and coming up with a fear and bad science now, or at best incomplete rationale, and taking only one position and freezing out other positions on why you need to do this vaccine thing. Bottom line, it's wrong. So with that, I know this has been a long rant. I apologize for that, but I think it is important. So with that, thanks for watching. Carry on.